Well, how many of you today can remember what it was like to be in high school? Let me hear you from across the live stream. Oh, I can't hear you. I can hear a couple people here today. Some of you are still in high school, and so of course you remember it. It's your current experience. Others, that's a striking memory. What was it like to be in high school for me? And I was thinking this week, by the time you get to high school, you have been in school for your entire life as far as you can remember. Most of us don't have, maybe we have a few memories before we're 5 years old when we started kindergarten, but most of us don't have continuous memory before that time. So really your whole life, the part of your life you can remember is all school. And I remember being in high school, or even when I was younger in elementary school, feeling like this is never going to end. I know it didn't make any sense. People told me I was eventually going to be out of school. That seemed like that's impossible. All I know is school. Eventually it's going to come to an end. Every grade I was in, they told me, get ready for that next grade. Because, the next grade is going to be so much harder, so much different than this one that you're in right now. Never seemed like it was. And it felt like I would be in that place, school, that kind of a lifestyle forever. Of course, the end of school came, and life became completely different. And if I could look back, if I could go back and talk to myself, when I was in grades 9, 10, 11, 12, the end is coming. The end is coming very soon, Isaac. Don't live for this time right now in high school. Live for what is coming in the future, because very shortly this is going to be over. And I think that's the kind of message all of us would say to ourselves if we could go back. We're in that period of waiting. It seems like it will never end. It feels like it's never going to end. But you know that the end is coming. And so you got to live for the future. And think about all the benefits of living in high school for what's coming after high school. Number one, you're going to be so much more prepared for what comes after if you're not all concerned and completely consumed by what's going on right there during high school. And number two, the things that happen in high school aren't going to be that bad. So you mess up in high school. Well, it doesn't matter that much because really it's going to end very soon. Well, all of that, my friends, is true about this whole life that we're in right now. It's so easy for us to get caught up thinking and feeling, especially feeling like the way things are right now is going to go on forever. But it is not. Your current career will come to an end. Your current, the way things are with the pandemic in our society, they will come to an end. Governments, the government of Canada, will one day come to an end. There are many good things in this life, some very hard things, but it will all come to an end. And that's what our story for today from the Bible is going to remind us vividly and powerfully that the end will come. We're in a series of messages right now called Not Home Yet, and we're jumping back into the book of Daniel. In this series, we're looking at Daniel, who lived in the 500s BC, a long time ago, 2,500 years ago. And he was an exile. Daniel was an exile. He was taken away from his home country and spent his entire adult life in a foreign country, feeling like this isn't really my home, longing to be in the place that felt he was made to be, the place he was really from. We're also looking at Peter. We've just finished the opening chapters of the book of 1 Peter, and we're going to be jumping back and forth between Daniel and Peter. Peter lived in the time of Jesus, around the year 0 up to about the year 67 AD. And so, 600 years after Daniel, Peter is feeling the same way. But Peter felt more like, this whole world that we live in, it's not what it's meant to be. It's not the place I was really created for. And that's the truth that we want to take into ourselves again and again. This world, this present life, is not what you were made for. It's only a stage just like high school, just like all of school was. It's only a stage in your growth toward the place that you were really made for. So don't expect this life to fulfill you completely. If you do, it will always disappoint. Live for what is coming. We're doing 3 things in this series: study, never give up, and the end. That's the tagline for this series of messages. We've been talking a lot about how to study the Bible. We've been studying it deeply. Sign up for a class by Zoom. That's an amazing thing, a great way to grow in your faith, great way to learn to study the Bible. Please sign up for that at gethope.ca. We've also looked at Peter's hope and Daniel's hope and how they were able to really walk through fire, walk through terrible hardships in life because of their hope that they had in God. And we want to be like that. But now we're in the part of this series of messages where we're going to start to look at the end. This first message is going to remind us that the end will come. And as we move forward, Daniel is going to start talking more and more about the end of the world, what that's going to look like, prophecies, visions that God gave to him. It's going to be very interesting and sometimes difficult to understand. You're going to have your thinking cap on, fully engaged as we go through those future messages. Today, we're going to look at the story of Belshazzar and the writing on the wall in Daniel chapter 5. So if you got a Bible, maybe you got your phone app, you want to pull that up so you can look at that. We'll have some of it on the screen as well as we read through it. Belshazzar, this is a famous story. If you've heard the saying, it's a saying in English, the writing is on the wall. Well, this is where that saying comes from. That saying means it's over. The writing is on the wall means it's done. There's nothing you can do to change it. You're going to see why that's the case as we look through this story today. Let me give you a little background, and then we'll read it, and then we'll draw just a couple of conclusions from the story of Belshazzar. Remember where we were at, okay? Daniel and his buddies were taken into exile in 605 BC. They were taken into exile by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar II, Nebuchadnezzar the Great. And we saw how Daniel, he became an advisor to Nebuchadnezzar and eventually a close friend to Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar was this guy who was really not a good guy. He killed lots of people. He was, sort of an off with their heads kind of king. Anybody did anything he didn't like? Off with their head. That's all. Or even worse, right? Like burn their house down, kill all their family. So bad guy. But here's the thing about Nebuchadnezzar. Deep in his heart, he was seeking after truth. In fact, that's where a lot of this angst and this anger that he had came from. His heart was trying to figure out what is true, what's the right thing to do in this life, who really is God, who is the real God. And because of that, the real God looked down on Nebuchadnezzar and said, look, this guy's doing all kinds of bad stuff, but all that can be forgiven. His heart is trying to find the truth, and I can work with that. So God pursued Nebuchadnezzar over a period of more than 50 years. God knew it was going to take a long time. Nebuchadnezzar was very far from the truth. And it took a long time and a lot of pain and suffering that God allowed or even brought into Nebuchadnezzar's life. But eventually, near the end of his life, Nebuchadnezzar gave his life to God, the true God. And he became a man who was full of peace and joy. And we saw that a number of weeks ago. You can look back, find those messages online. But what happened right after he died, okay, now Daniel's still alive. What happened right after he died is chaos. His kids, one of his kids became king of this huge empire, biggest empire in the world at the time. One of his kids becomes king, and he's king for a couple of years, and a couple of years later, his brother kills him. Okay, these kids were not raised well, let's just say that. And they also were in an environment, power corrupts. The vast majority of human beings, until we have followed Jesus long enough and been changed to be like him, we are not safe to be given power of any kind. We misuse it. We abuse it. We think we're all that and we can do it all. And that's what these guys did. So one brother becomes king, his brother kills him, then another relative kills him a couple years after that. Within the span of 7 years, there's 4 different kings. And so at this point in Daniel chapter 5, we're dealing with the last king of the empire. Now that king's name is actually Nabonidus, the last king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And for a long time, some people who were against the Bible, against what, that the Bible saying it wasn't true, looked at the book of Daniel and said, look, Daniel they didn't even know the history. There was never a king named Belshazzar. There was never a king of Babylon. The last king of Babylon was Nabonidus, not Belshazzar. So for a long time, this was one of the key proofs that the Bible was not accurate. And then 2 different things were discovered. Cylinders, we showed you those a number of weeks ago. I don't have those on the screen today. Cylinders from the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire and tablets that were distributed to the whole empire were discovered in archaeological sites in Babylon and in the Neo-Babylonian Empire, showing that Nabonidus had a son named, guess what? Belshazzar. He had a son named Belshazzar. And they also show that Nabonidus, here's how he was king, okay? When he became king, he went off, the first thing he did was went to war. This is what all kings did back then. And he conquered some new lands that they hadn't controlled before. And he thought to himself, you know what? This new land that I conquered is actually really nice. And if I hang out in Babylon, one of my relatives might try to kill me. So he just never came home from his first war. He just went off and stayed there for more than 10 years. And so Belshazzar, his son, actually was reigning as king in Babylon. And so at this point, Belshazzar is the kind of king, the sort of king of Babylon. He's not officially the king, but it calls him the king. He's ruling as king. And he basically, we're going to see what kind of guy he is. He is basically a guy who's just trying to show everybody how tough he is, how awesome he is. And he's had some success in his life just basically showing off, showing people how big, how tough he is, shocking people, and getting them to follow him. So let's read this story. We'll read through Daniel chapter 5, and we'll make a number of comments, stop at a number of places as we go through it. So here we go. Daniel chapter 5 on the screen. King Belshazzar, remember he's the kind of king, the pretending to be king, but everybody treats him like king. He gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles, and he drank wine with them. And while Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, or his ancestor, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Next slide. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Let's pause right there. So first of all, you can see what kind of a guy Belshazzar is just from these opening lines. Now, there's something that you don't know as you begin to read chapter 5 of Daniel, and this is something we can learn from history and also from what happens at the end of the chapter and in chapter 6. And what you don't know is that right at this moment, the city of Babylon is surrounded by an army. The city of Babylon is under siege by the Persian army. So at the moment when his city is in utter crisis, there is a huge army literally at the gates. What is Belshazzar doing at that moment? Running around inspiring his generals, leading, trying to protect his people, praying to the gods or who he thinks is God that they might save him from this army on the outside? No. What Belshazzar is doing is throwing a massive party. Now, for us, those of us going through this, all of us in the world right now, going through this COVID-19 pandemic and restrictions, you can sense just how big of a party that is, right? How long has it been since you were even around 100 people, much less 1,000 people? He invites 1,000 of his nobles to a party. Think how much wine is going on, what kind of a party that is. He's got all his wives, all his concubines there. This is a crazy, it's like a rave maybe would be the closest thing to compare it to today. This is a huge party that he throws in the middle of the biggest crisis that the empire has ever faced. Belshazzar cannot see reality. Keep that in mind as we go through this. He can't even see it. Here's what happens next. Here we go. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. So everybody's partying. Most of them are drunk, maybe all of them. All of a sudden, they see something. It's like a vision, and it is writing. It is literally, looks like fingers or a hand, and it is writing on the wall of the palace. Think how everybody felt in that moment. This is not something that happens all the time in life or in the Bible. In fact, this never happens anywhere else in the Bible. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. Remember how we said that Belshazzar is a guy who just lived basically by boasting. He lived his life by saying, like, I am so awesome, check me out. That was the main way that he operated. He is not prepared for real crisis. He is not a person who has faith that can walk through fire. The things that he has built his life on will not stand. When he sees this handwriting on the wall, he is terrified and he almost faints. Next up. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. You remember these guys from earlier in Daniel? Nebuchadnezzar kept summoning these same guys. Tell me what's going on. They pretty much always said, we have no idea, king. So they say the same thing to Belshazzar. He said to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and a gold chain placed around their neck, and they'll be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. But they all say they can't read it. They say they can't read the writing. Next slide. Then the queen steps up. The king's terrified. Nobody can read this writing. The queen steps up and she says this, may the king live forever. Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, she names him, this is important, whom the king called Belshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. We'll pause there. Now, there's several amazing things here. First, though, I want you to imagine. Use your imagination. What did Daniel feel like? Daniel's about to be called into this scene. And in fact, there's a number of things we know about Daniel at this point. One of them is we know his age within a year or two. When we first met Daniel in 605 and he was brought to Babylon, we know that he was about 13 years old. That was the age that Jewish boys were initiated into manhood. It was also the age at which the Babylonians brought people into their training program for new advisors to the king. Daniel and his friends were brought in at that age. So we know that at this point, at this moment in time, Daniel is either 79 or 80 years old. So now we've jumped way forward. Daniel spent most of his life helping Nebuchadnezzar, becoming close friends with this crazy pagan king of Babylon, and watching God do amazing things in his life. Then Daniel kind of stepped back. I think he probably very wisely walked out of the palace and kind of hid himself during the chaos that happened after Nebuchadnezzar's death. He didn't want anything to do with it. But we see that Daniel is now held in very high esteem in the kingdom. Even though he's not an advisor at this point, there are many people who remember what has happened in Daniel's life. Notice that the queen does not call him by the name that Nebuchadnezzar had given him. She mentions it. When Daniel had first come to Babylon, he had been renamed. The name Daniel is a reference to the God of Israel, the one true God. The name Belshazzar, which is very similar actually to the king we're dealing with here, so it's a little confusing, Belshazzar. Don't get those confused. Belteshazzar was the name that Nebuchadnezzar gave to Daniel, and it was a reference to the gods of Babylon, the god Bel, in fact, in particular. So during Nebuchadnezzar's lifetime, Daniel was always known as Belteshazzar. But what's he called now? He's not called Belteshazzar anymore. She names him Daniel again and again. 3 times, if you read through the whole chapter, the queen calls him Daniel. This is a clear reference to the God of Israel. Because the people, the nobles, the kings had seen what the one true God did through Daniel. They no longer call him by the name of their gods. They call him by the name of his God. This is probably also why, you notice at the beginning, Belshazzar, this king, this crazy king pretending to be king, he calls for the cups that were used in the temple of Jerusalem to worship the one true God. He calls for those to drink out of them. No one up to this point, not even Nebuchadnezzar the Great, would drink from those cups. Why? Because they had seen the power of that God. They had seen the God of Israel do miracles right in front of them. And so no one would touch those cups. They knew that those were holy to that God, and they didn't want to disrespect him. But Belshazzar is he's trying to do the craziest, most disrespectful, most shocking things that he can possibly do. That's why he calls for those cups. So there's a clear remembrance here of what God has done through Daniel. Now let me ask you this. When Daniel is called in by King Belshazzar, how do you think he feels? Take a moment at home and just say out loud, how do you think Daniel feels in the moment when he is called into this court of this new upstart king who doesn't care about anything, it seems? He's partying while the city is under siege. As we get to further chapters in Daniel, and even if you think back to Daniel chapter 4, Daniel has actually predicted, he has seen visions from God that tell him that this empire is going to end very soon. Daniel no doubt knows that the Persians are going to win. Belshazzar thinks that the walls of Babylon are strong enough to withstand anything. He thinks that the way things are right now is going to go on forever. Daniel knows that this king is about to be dead. And this king calls him into his presence. Belshazzar calls Daniel in. 80-year-old Daniel walks in. I'll just tell you the story for a couple minutes here, and then we'll go back to the text in a moment. 80-year-old Daniel walks in, and Belshazzar says to him, Daniel, thank you for coming. Are you the guy? Are you the one who did all this amazing stuff? Okay, awesome. So here's what I'm going to do. If you can tell me what the writing on the wall says, I'm going to give you so many honors. Daniel, I'm going to give you a gold chain around your neck. I'm going to give you a purple robe. A purple robe cost like $1 million in the ancient world. Like actually, literally it did. What we would think of that much money to us, maybe even more. That's what it costs. I'm going to give you a purple robe. And I'm going to make you the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom. Isn't that awesome? How does Daniel feel in that moment? Number one, he's already had all that stuff from Nebuchadnezzar. Oh, you're going to give me riches and wealth and power. I already had all that. It's meaningless. Number two, Daniel knows that the guy who's telling him he's going to give all that, this guy's about to be dead. Daniel says, no thank you, king. Please keep your gold and your purple robe and your honors. Could you please give those to someone else? I think under his breath he's saying, I don't really want to be associated with you. I know who's going to win, and it's not you. But I will read the writing on the wall. Let's jump forward to the beginning of that, I think maybe verse 17. Next slide, even further. Next, go to where he actually reads the inscription. Daniel tells him a lot of things further. Next slide. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. Let's go there. There we go. We're jumping forward. You can read what happens in between. Daniel says a lot of things. He reminds Belshazzar what happened during the days of Nebuchadnezzar. He tells him, no, thank you for all those riches and honors. And then he reads the inscription for Belshazzar. And this is a stunning moment. Because this inscription, first of all, it is stark. It is a declaration written in the plaster of the walls of the palace that Belshazzar is a dead man and his kingdom is over. And watch what happens right after it. Belshazzar can't even hear it at all. Belshazzar is blind and deaf to the truth right in front of his face. Check it out. Daniel says, therefore, because Belshazzar, you knew all this stuff that God has done, and you have not sought him in any way at all. You even dared to disrespect him in the most striking way you could think of, just to put on a show for your nobles. Therefore, he has sent the hand that wrote the inscription. And this is the inscription that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Here is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. You have been weighed in the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So here's the stark declaration. Your life is over and so is your kingdom. And here's how Belshazzar responds. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, and a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. And that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. Next slide. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. I want us to think about Belshazzar for a moment and what his life means for us. Number one, it means that the end will come. He is a vivid, striking reminder to us that we must not live by the way that we feel in this life and in this present world. We often feel like what's going on right now is just going to be this way forever. No, it will not. The end, in so many different senses of that word, will in fact come. Don't be like Belshazzar and live just for what's right now. Don't be maybe like you were, like I was in high school, just thinking about what's happening around me right now and living for that alone. High school is going to end. Live in high school like you're going to have a life as an adult, because then you'll be prepared for that life as an adult. And you won't be so stressed out by all the stuff that's happening in high school, because it's just for now. Live this whole life that way. Live this whole life recognizing that it will come to an end. Think about a relative, maybe someone you know in your family or you've known in the past who's no longer alive on this earth. They have died in the way that we say, although if they were followers of Jesus, they are most certainly alive right now. If they could speak to you right now, what do you think they would say? No doubt, one of the things they would tell us is, don't stress out so much about this life. It will come to an end. And there is another life beyond it. Get ready for that. Spend your time thinking about that and getting ready for it, because it's coming. Don't be like Belshazzar. The second thing that I want us to take away from Belshazzar's life is not so much a point, but a question. Here's the question. What does it look like to lose your soul? The Bible has a lot to say about losing your soul, something Jesus talks about often. What does that actually look like in a human being? Can that really happen? Can you lose your soul? Yeah, you can. How does it happen? Think about Belshazzar for a minute and what his attitude is like. Why is it that God pursued Nebuchadnezzar for 50 years? But Belshazzar, the first time Daniel shows up, boom, it's over. You're dead. Your end has come. There's no more chances for you. Why the difference? The difference is because of where their hearts were at, and where their hearts were at for a long time. Nebuchadnezzar, despite all his sin, all the stuff, all the evil stuff that he did, his heart was seeking after the truth. He wanted to know the truth, and God can work with that. But Belshazzar has decided to live a lie, no matter what. I want to use a modern illustration to help us get our heads around this. All right, some of you will know this song. It was really popular. I don't know, it came out, 2-3 years ago? The song is Old Town Road. Do you guys know that song? If you're at home, you're probably, if you know it, you're probably singing it because it's super catchy. All right, the song is a cross, a fusion between country music. Where's my country music fans? And rap music. Where's my rap music fans? All right, a fusion between country and rap. What could be better than that? My dad would say that if you fuse country and rap, then you get rap with a C on the front. What does that spell? I don't know. Anyway, I really like Old Town Road. It's a lot of fun. I'm going to take my horse to the Old Town Road. You'll probably find me, it's so catchy, you'll find me singing that around the campfire this summer when I'm out camping with my guitar. But the song has terrible lyrics and meaning. It's just awful. Okay, the whole song is basically about this. I'm going to do whatever I want. This whole song is about an attitude. I'm going to keep on doing the thing I always did my whole life. I'm so awesome. I'm so big. I'm so tough. Nobody can tell me what to do. I do whatever I want. There's a repeated line in the song that says this: can't nobody tell me nothing. Think about that for a minute. Can't nobody tell me nothing. Don't think too long about the double negative. I know some of you are caught up on that. It means no one can tell me anything. What if that were really true? What if that became actually true of a human heart? That it could no longer receive any truth from outside of itself. It was so deeply caught in a lie that heart, that human soul had chosen again and again. I believe this lie. I believe this lie. I believe I am so awesome. I believe that I should just keep on showing how awesome I am, how big I am, how tough I am, and that's the right way to get through life. What if it became so trapped in that it could no longer receive truth from outside itself? A soul like that would be permanently lost to God. If a soul could no longer receive truth from God, no matter what God does, even if He sent a miracle right in front of someone's eyes, they would not blink, they would not hesitate to just keep going the same way they'd always been going. That soul is permanently lost. That's Belshazzar. That song, Old Town Road, do you know who wrote it? It was a joint effort by two people. One was Billy Ray Cyrus. You remember him from the 90s? If you break my heart, my achy, breaky heart. Yeah, we love that song. The other person who helped write that song is a young guy named Lil Nas X. And his life, he's so much like Belshazzar. He actually, if you go look him up, don't look too deeply, but if you go look him up, what he does all the time is just try to shock everyone around him. This is how he's learned to succeed in life. Just by being as shocking as he can be, just like Belshazzar. And in fact, I'll bring up this. This is him in Old Town Road. This is him more recently. More recently, he has created, this is just one of the many shocking things he's trying to do right now, he's created a Satan shoe. So it's a Nike. It's got a pentagram on it. It's embroidered with, it's actually got a Bible verse on it. I think it's from Luke 10. It's, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I don't think he knows the context of that verse. It's Jesus speaking, and anyway, we won't go into that, but he's created this Satan shoe. It's got a drop of human blood in the sole. Why did he make it? I don't think it actually because he consciously thinks he's a Satan worshiper. I think he's just trying to shock people. That's what his whole life is about. Shock people, show how awesome you are, and you're going to succeed. That's the way to go. That's the way to be lost forever. You see, this is what Belshazzar is like. And these two guys, let's hold them up today as an example, a vivid illustration of what it looks like to lose your soul. If you continually place the deepest part of yourself, what you rely on, what you trust in, is a lie. It's not God. It's some other thing that you've learned to get by in life with. You will eventually find a place, you can reach a place where you cannot receive truth from outside yourself. You reach a place where it's not that you can't be forgiven anymore. God will forgive any sin through Jesus. But you'll reach a place where you can't repent anymore. You can't choose to turn anymore. You've trained yourself for so long in this one way of, I'm just going to do things my own way and be my own boss, and I'm going to show everybody. You've trained yourself in that way so long that you're never going to turn. Now, Belshazzar and Lil Nas X are dramatic examples, but there are much more subtle ways that this happens to people all around us and even to us. As we're tempted to put our trust in things that are not God. Where is the deepest part of your soul leaning right now? What are you leaning on? What are you trusting in? The end will come. What does it look like to lose your soul? Let's pray, and we'll continue in worship.